The lightning split the sky as Ruth Caldwell hammered her fist against the church door, her torn wedding dress clinging to her trembling frame like wet silk. Blood dripped from her split lip onto the wooden steps, mixing with the torrential rain that had driven her through 3 miles of wilderness. "Please," she gasped, though no one could hear her above the thunder. "Please, God, let someone be here." The heavy oak door creaked open, revealing a man whose presence seemed to steady the very air around him. Preacher Eli Thornfield stood 6 feet tall, his dark hair streaked with premature silver at 32. Eyes the color of storm clouds holding depths that spoke of both mercy and steel. He took in her battered appearance, the bruises blooming. Purple along her collarbone, the way she favored her left arm. The desperate fear etched into features that would have been beautiful if not for the terror. "Sweet Jesus," he breathed, stepping aside without hesitation. Ruth stumbled across the threshold, her bare feet leaving muddy prints on the sanctuary floor. She collapsed against a pew, chest heaving as she fought for breath. Between sobs that came from somewhere deeper than her lungs, Eli moved with quiet efficiency, retrieving a wool blanket from the vestry and wrapping it around her shoulders. His touch was gentle, reverent, as if she were made of spun glass. "Who did this to you, Josiah?" she whispered, the name falling from her lips like a curse. "My husband. We were. The ceremony was today." Her voice cracked on the words. "He said I belonged to him now, said he could do whatever pleased him." Eli's jaw tightened, and for a moment something dangerous flickered behind his compassionate facade. In the coal mining settlement of Millhaven, justice often came at the end of a rope rather than from any courthouse. "Where is he now? Looking for me?" Ruth's eyes darted toward the windows, expecting to see Josiah Blackthorn's hulking silhouette. "At any moment, he'll come here eventually." "Everyone knows you take in strays, preacher. You're not a stray," Eli said firmly, kneeling before her so their eyes were level. "You're a child of God who deserves better than any man's fists." Church door burst open with a bang that made Ruth shriek. Josiah Blackthorn filled the doorway, his bulk blocking out the storm behind him. Whiskey and rage rolled off him in waves as his bloodshot eyes fixed on his bride. "There you are, wife." His voice carried the lazy menace of a predator hood. Cornered his prey. "Time to come home and finish what we started." Eli rose slowly, positioning himself between Ruth and her husband. Despite being smaller than Josiah's bear-like frame, there was something in the preacher's bearing that made the bigger man hesitate. "She's claimed sanctuary," Eli said quietly, "under God's protection now." Josiah laughed, a sound like breaking. "Bottles, your God don't mean much when a man's got legal claim to his property, preacher. Step aside." "No." Single word hung in the air like a challenge. Outside, the thunder rolled closer, and Ruth realized that her life balanced on the edge of whatever happened next. The silence stretched between the two men like a taut wire ready to snap. Ruth pressed herself deeper into the pew, watching as Josiah's face darkened with the promise of violence. She'd seen that look before, right before he'd torn her wedding dress and shown her what marriage would mean in his household. "You're making a mistake, Thornfield," Josiah growled, taking a step forward. "I got papers signed today. Legal and binding. That woman belongs to me." "Papers don't make a marriage," Eli replied, his voice steady as bedrock. "Love does. Respect does. And from the look of her, you've got neither." Josiah's hand drifted to the hunting knife at his belt. "Maybe you need a lesson in minding your own affairs. Maybe you need a lesson in treating women like human beings instead of livestock." The words hit Josiah like a physical blow. His face contorted with rage, and he lunged forward, the blade singing as it cleared its sheath. But Eli had spent his youth in the Colorado mining camps before finding God, and some instincts never fade. He sidestepped the clumsy attack, his fist connecting with Josiah's temple in a precise blow that sent the bigger man crashing into the altar. The cross above them swayed ominously as Josiah struggled to his feet, blood streaming from a gash above his eye. "You just signed your death warrant, holy man. The only death warrant here is the one you signed when you laid hands on her," Eli said, helping Ruth to her feet. Now get out of God's house before I forget my vows about turning the other cheek. Josiah spat blood onto the sanctuary floor, but backed toward the door. This ain't over. Law's on my side, and come morning, I'll be back with the sheriff. We'll see how righteous you feel in chains. The church door slammed shut, leaving Eli and Ruth alone with the drumming rain and the weight of what had just transpired. Legs gave out, and she sank back onto the pew, trembling not from cold now, but from the realization of what Eli had risked for her. "Why?" she whispered. "You don't even know me." Eli knelt beside her again, his storm-gray eyes soft with something. That made her heart flutter despite everything. "I know enough. I know you're brave. You ran 3 miles through a storm to escape. I know you're strong. You're still fighting when most would have given up. And I know you deserve better than what that animal would give you." Ruth felt tears spilled down her cheeks, but these were different from the ones she'd shed in terror. These carried hope, fragile as a bird's egg, but real nonetheless. He's right about the law. Come morning, we'll face whatever comes. Eli's hand covered hers, warm and solid and safe. "But you won't face it alone. I promise you that. I have nowhere to go. No family left, no money of my own." Josiah made sure of that before the ceremony. I was quiet for a long moment, and Ruth could practically hear the wheels turning in his mind. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of absolute conviction. "There might be a way. If you're willing, what kind of way?" He met her eyes directly, and she saw her own desperate hope reflected there. "Marry me instead." Ruth's breath caught in her throat. "What did you say?" "Marry me," Eli repeated, his voice steady, despite the magnitude of what he was proposing. "Tonight. Right now, before God and whatever witnesses we can rouse from their beds." "You can't be serious." Ruth searched his face for any sign of jest or pity, finding neither. "You don't even know my full name." Ruth Caldwell, 23 years old, daughter of the late blacksmith Jonas Caldwell and his wife Mercy. Orphaned at 16 when the fever took them both. "You've been working the Henderson farm for 7 years, sending half your wages to your aunt in Philadelphia, who never wrote back?" Eli's voice was gentle, matter of fact. "I've watched you in church every Sunday since you arrived in Millhaven. I know you sing hymns while you work, because old Henrik Henderson told me. I know you read to his grandchildren when their mother took sick. I know you're kind and good and deserving of a man who sees you as a blessing, not a burden." Tears blurred Ruth's vision. In 7 years, no one had seen her so clearly, had spoken of her with such careful attention. But marriage, that's sacred. Not some legal maneuver to escape another legal paper. "It would be sacred," Eli said firmly. "I wouldn't ask if I didn't mean every word. I've been alone in this calling for 12 years, telling myself I was married to the work. But watching you these past months, seeing your strength and grace, He took her hands in both of his. "I think God might have brought you here for both our sakes." Outside, the storm was beginning to lessen, but the danger it had washed away was far from over. Ruth knew that Josiah would make good on his threats, come daylight. The sheriff, corrupt as he was, would side with legal papers over moral arguments. "Unless, couldn't touch me if I was your wife," she said slowly. "He couldn't touch you because you'd be under my protection, and I'd die before. Letting harm come to you?" The fierce promise in Eli's voice sent warmth flooding through her chest. "But Ruth, I need you to understand this wouldn't be a marriage of convenience if you don't want it to be. I'm offering you my name, my home, my protection. Offering you my heart, if you'll have it." Ruth stared at this man who had appeared in her darkest moment like an answer to prayer she hadn't dared voice. Eli Thornfield, who preached hope to broken souls and lived his faith through action rather than empty words. Who had faced down a knife-wielding drunk to protect her, was now offering her everything he had to give. "There's no courtship period," she said, grasping for practical concerns to steady herself. "No time to know each other properly. We'll have a lifetime for that, if you say yes. No wedding dress, no flowers or cake or celebration. All we need is the truth we speak before God." Ruth looked around the sanctuary where she'd collapsed less than an hour ago, broken and terrified.
Ow.
the same space where Eli now knelt before her, offering salvation in the most unexpected form. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd fled one wedding only to find herself contemplating another. But this felt different. This felt like choice rather than ownership, like hope rather than desperation. "Yes," she whispered, the word barely audible above the dying storm. Eli's face transformed with relief and joy so pure it took her breath away. "Yes, yes, Eli Thornfield, I'll marry you." He stood and kissed her hand with reverent tenderness. "Then let's wake the church bell ringer. We have a wedding to perform before sunrise." By the time dawn broke over Millhaven, Ruth Caldwell had become Ruth Thornfield in the eyes of both God and law. The ceremony had been simple, witnessed by old Henrik Henderson, whom Eli had roused from his bed, and Widow Morrison, who served as the church organist. No music had accompanied their vows, only the gentle patter of the dying storm against stained glass windows. Ruth now sat at the small table in Eli's modest parsonage, wrapped in one of his shirts that hung loose on her smaller frame, watching him prepare breakfast with the same methodical care he brought to everything. The domesticity of the moment felt surreal after the violence and terror of the previous night. "Regrets?" Eli asked softly, not looking up from the eggs he was tending. "About marrying you?" "No." Ruth surprised herself with the certainty in her voice. "About the circumstances that led to it, ... Yes, you shouldn't have had to risk yourself." "For my mistakes?" "What mistakes?" Eli turned to face her, spatula in hand, agreeing to marry a man who presented himself as honorable. "Trying to build a life for yourself?" "There's no shame in either of those things. I should have seen what Josiah really was. Signs were there. Men like Blackthorn are skilled at hiding their true nature until it's too late." Eli's jaw tightened. "The fault is his, not yours." A sharp knock at the door interrupted them. Ruth's blood turned to ice water. She'd recognized that heavy-handed pounding anywhere. Eli squeezed her shoulder reassuringly before opening the door to reveal Sheriff Clayton Morse, his deputy Jeremiah Pike flanking him, and behind them both, Josiah Blackthorn with a bandage wrapped around his head and murder in his eyes. "Morning, preacher," Sheriff Morse said, his tone deceptively casual. "Need to have a word about the theft of another man's property." "No theft occurred here, Sheriff," Eli replied calmly. "Only a wedding ceremony performed according to the laws of both God and this territory." Josiah pushed forward, his face purple with rage. "That woman is my legal wife. We were married yesterday afternoon by Judge Whitmore himself, and she became my legal wife at 3 o'clock this morning," Eli said, producing the marriage certificate signed by Henrik Henderson and Widow Morrison. "Witnessed and recorded according to territorial statute." Sheriff Morse examined the document with growing frustration. Ruth could practically see him searching for any technicality that might invalidate their union and keep Josiah's monthly bribes flowing into his pocket. "There's the matter of bigamy," Deputy Pike suggested. "No bigamy," Eli countered. "Mrs. Thornfield's first marriage was never consummated. She fled before the ceremony could be completed with the traditional bedding. Legally, it's null and void." This was news to Ruth, who stared at Eli with surprise. When had he learned territorial marriage law so thoroughly? Josiah's face twisted with fury. "You lying bastard. I was married to her fair and square. Were you?" Eli's voice carried an edge that made even the sheriff take notice. "'Cause from what I understand, you struck your bride during the ceremony itself in front of witnesses. Judge Whitmore might be interested to know that his court was used to facilitate assault." The threat hit home. Judge Whitmore, corrupt as he might be in other matters, took a dim view of violence against women. His own sister had died at her husband's hands years before. "This ain't over," Josiah snarled, but Ruth could hear the uncertainty creeping into his voice. "Actually, it is." Eli stepped closer, and despite being smaller than Josiah, something in his bearing made the bigger man retreat. "Mrs. Thornfield is under my protection now. Any attempt to harm or harass her will be met with the full consequences of territorial law regarding the assault of a preacher's wife. I trust you understand the severity of that charge, Sheriff Morse." The sheriff's expression soured further. Assaulting a man of God's wife carried penalties that even his corruption couldn't easily dismiss, not with the territorial governor's recent crackdown on lawlessness. "Come on, Blackthorn," Morse said finally. "Nothing more to be done here." "This ain't finished, preacher," Josiah called over his shoulder as they retreated. "Mark my words." Eli closed the door and turned back to Ruth, who was staring at him with something approaching awe. "How did you know all that about marriage law?" A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Seminary covers more than just theology. And I may have spent some time reading legal texts after I started considering matrimony myself." "You were planning to marry someone?" "I was hoping to marry you, Ruth Thornfield. I just never imagined it would happen quite like this." 3 weeks passed in a strange, sweet rhythm that Ruth had never experienced before. She woke each morning to the sound of Eli preparing for his dawn prayers, the quiet murmur of his voice, a comfort that sank into her bones. Their days fell into an easy pattern. She tended the parsonage and helped with church duties while he ministered to the scattered souls of Millhaven and the surrounding mining camps. But it was the evenings that surprised her most. After supper, Eli would read aloud from books that had nothing to do with scripture poetry by William Blake, adventure stories by Sir Walter Scott, even scientific journals that somehow found their way to their remote settlement. His voice brought the words to life in ways that made Ruth's heart race with possibilities she'd never considered. "You could read them yourself, you know," Eli said one evening, catching her rapt attention as he finished a passage about botanical expeditions in South America. "Can read," Ruth said, defensive. "Been reading since I was 5. I know you can read." "I meant you could read for pleasure, not just necessity." He closed the journal and looked at her thoughtfully. "What did you dream of being before life demanded you be practical?" The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked her about dreams. I used to want to be a teacher. When I was young, before my parents died." "What stopped you from pursuing it?" Ruth gestured around the modest parsonage. "Look at me, Eli. I'm a farm worker who married a preacher to escape an abusive husband. I'm hardly teacher material. You're intelligent, patient, and kind. You already teach the Henderson children when they need help with their letters. Else does a teacher need?" Before Ruth could answer, a commotion outside drew their attention. Shouts echoed through the settlement, followed by the sound of running feet. Eli was on his feet instantly, moving toward the window with the quick grace that never failed to surprise her. "Fire," he said grimly. "The Henderson farm." They ran together through the darkness, joining a bucket brigade that had already formed to fight the blaze consuming the main barn. Ruth's heart clenched as she saw Henrik Henderson's weathered face illuminated by the flames, tears streaming down his cheeks as he watched his life's work turn to ash. "The animals," his granddaughter Cora cried. "Some of them are still inside." Without hesitation, Ruth broke from the bucket line and ran toward the burning structure. She could hear Eli shouting her name, but the sound was lost in the roar of flames and her own thundering pulse. Inside the barn, smoke choked her lungs as she felt her way toward the animal stalls. She found 3 horses still trapped, too frightened to follow the escape route the men had tried to create. One by one, she led them out, her dress singed and her hands blistered from hot metal latches. As she emerged with the last horse, the barn's roof began to cave in with a sound like the world ending. Strong arms caught her as she stumbled, and she found herself pressed against Eli's chest, breathing in his scent of soap and wood smoke beneath, the acrid smell of fire. "Don't you ever," he said fiercely, his voice rough with emotion, "ever risk yourself like that again without telling me? The horses could have been replaced. You couldn't be." The raw honesty in his voice made her look up at him, and what she saw in his eyes took her breath away. This wasn't gratitude or admiration or even affection. This was love, pure and powerful and absolutely terrifying in its intensity. "Eli," she whispered. "I know we married for practical reasons," he said, his hands framing her face with infinite gentleness. "I know this isn't the courtship you deserved, or the romance you might have dreamed of. But Ruth, what I feel for you, it's not practical anymore. It's not convenient or careful or sensible." The fire cast dancing shadows across his features, but his eyes were steady, certain. "I love you, completely, irrevocably, and with everything. I have to give." Ruth felt something shift inside her chest, like a locked door finally opening. "I love you too," she said, the words coming from some deep place she'd kept carefully guarded. "I think I started falling in love with you that first night, when you knelt down to meet my eyes, instead of looking down at me." Eli's smile could have outshone the dying flames. "Then we've both been fools, haven't we? Dancing around something that was right there waiting for us." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, while around them the settlement worked to save what could be salvaged from the fire. Ruth melted into him, finally allowing herself to believe that this strange, wonderful marriage might become everything she'd never dared hope for. The kiss was interrupted by Henrik Henderson's gruff voice. "Preacher, Mrs. Thornfield. Thank you. Both." The old farmer's eyes were wet with tears of relief. "Those horses, ... They're all I have left of my Catherine. She raised them from foals." Ruth pulled back from Eli's embrace, suddenly self-conscious about their public display of affection, but the warmth in his eyes never wavered. "I'm just glad they're safe, Henrik. Safe because of you, both of you." Henrik glanced between them, and Ruth saw understanding dawn in his weathered features. "About time you two stopped pretending this was just a marriage of convenience." Over the following days, word of Ruth's heroism spread throughout Millhaven and the surrounding mining camps. More importantly, people began to see her not as the woman who'd fled from Josiah Blackthorne, but as the preacher's wife who'd risked her life to save beloved animals. The distinction mattered in a community where reputation could mean the difference between acceptance and isolation. But it was Eli's reaction that meant the most to her. He didn't lecture her about the danger she'd courted, didn't try to extract promises about future safety. Instead, he simply made sure she had salve for her burns and held her a little closer each night. Their marriage began to shift from cautious friendship to genuine partnership. Ruth found herself looking forward to their evening conversations, to the way Eli's face lit up when she offered her own thoughts on the books they read together. She discovered that beneath his ministerial composure lay a sharp wit and a fascinating mind that had traveled far more than his current circumstances might suggest. "You weren't always a preacher," she said one evening as they walked through the settlement. "It wasn't a question." "No," Eli admitted. "I was a lot of things before I found my calling. Prospector briefly. Railroad worker. Even tried my hand at law for a while." "What changed?" Eli was quiet for several steps. "I saw too much senseless suffering. Too many people ground down by circumstances beyond their control, by other people's greed or cruelty." He looked at her sideways. "I decided I'd rather spend my life helping heal wounds than creating new ones." "Is that why you became a preacher? To heal wounds?" "Among other reasons." His smile held secrets she was beginning to recognize. "About you? What would you do if you could do anything?" Ruth considered the question seriously. A month ago, her dreams had seemed impossibly distant. Now, married to a man who actually listened to her thoughts and valued her opinions, possibilities felt closer. I think I'd like to start a school, real school, not just Sunday lessons. Children in the mining camps deserve better than growing up unable to read or write. Then let's do it." Ruth stopped walking. "What? Let's start a school. There's that empty building next to the church used to be a general store before the owner moved on. Could convert it easily enough." "Eli, we can't just... I don't have any credentials. Formal training. You read better than most college graduates I've met. You're patient with children. You understand what it's like to struggle, which makes you compassionate rather than condescending." He took her hands. "What more do you need?" The idea was so appealing, so perfect, that Ruth felt tears prick her eyes. The community would never accept it. A woman teaching their children? Unheard of? Let me worry about the community. I have some influence in that area. Eli's grin was decidedly unpreacherly. Besides, after the barn fire, half the settlement thinks you walk on water. Might as well put that reputation to good use. That night, as they lay in their narrow bed with Ruth's head on Eli's shoulder, she allowed herself to imagine it. Children's voices reciting lessons, the scratch of chalk on slate, the satisfaction of watching young minds discover the power of written words. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" for seeing possibilities where I only saw limitations, for making me believe I could be more than I thought I was. Eli's arm tightened around her. You've always been extraordinary, Ruth. I just helped you see it. Outside their window, Millhaven slept peacefully under a canopy of stars, unaware that their preacher and his wife were planning a small revolution in the form of a schoolhouse. 6 months later, the sound of children's laughter echoed from the newly christened Millhaven School as Ruth stood at the blackboard, guiding 8 eager students through their arithmetic lessons. The old general store had been transformed with donated desks, slates, and books ordered from back east with funds raised by the church congregation. Very good, Timothy, Ruth praised as the youngest Henderson boy successfully worked through a division problem. Now, can you tell the class how you knew to carry the remainder? Through the window, she could see Eli splitting wood for the school's pot-belly stove, his shirt sleeves rolled up despite the autumn chill. Even after all these months, the sight of him still made her heart skip. Their marriage had bloomed into something neither of them had expected, a partnership built on respect, shared dreams, and a love that grew stronger with each passing day. The school had been an instant success, parents who had never imagined their children might learn more than basic sums and reading were amazed to see young minds flourishing under Ruth's patient guidance. She taught not just letters and numbers, but geography using maps Eli had somehow procured, basic science through nature walks and simple experiments, and always the confidence to question and learn. Mrs. Thornfield, little Mary Peterson, raised her hand. Why do some folks say women shouldn't be teachers? Ruth set down her chalk, considering her answer carefully. Some people believe that men and women have different abilities, Mary, but I think the most important question is, what do you believe you can accomplish? I want to be a doctor, Mary declared with the confidence of her 7 years. Then study hard, read everything you can, and never let anyone tell you your dreams are too big. The afternoon lessons concluded with Ruth's customary reading time. Today's selection was from a volume of poetry Eli had given her for their first month anniversary, a collection by Emily Dickinson that had arrived all the way from Massachusetts. Because I could not stop for death, Ruth read aloud. He kindly stopped for me. ... As the children filed out with promises to practice their penmanship, Ruth began organizing the classroom for tomorrow's lessons. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice the figure darkening the doorway until a familiar voice made her blood freeze. Fancy setup you got here, Ruth? She turned slowly to find Josiah Blackthorne leaning against the doorframe. 6 months hadn't improved him, if anything. He looked worse. His clothes were dirty, his beard unkempt, and his eyes held the feral gleam of a man who'd been drinking his meals. Hello, Josiah. Ruth kept her voice steady, though her hand moved instinctively toward the bell rope that would summon Eli from the churchyard. What do you want? What's mine, he said, stepping into the schoolroom. I've been thinking these past months about what that preacher stole from me. Figured it was time to collect. I was never yours, Josiah. That marriage was never valid. Legal papers say different. He pulled a document from his coat pocket, waving it like a weapon. Judge Whitmore's signature, plain as day. Those papers are worthless now. I'm Mrs. Eli Thornfield, legally married and witnessed by the whole community. Josiah's laugh was ugly, mean. Thornfield ain't here to protect you now, is he? Just you and me, like it should have been from the start. Ruth backed toward the window, her mind racing. Eli was close, but not close enough to hear a scream over the sound of his axe. The children were gone, the settlement busy with afternoon chores. For the first time in months, she was truly alone with her nightmare. You can't just take me, Josiah. People will know. They'll come looking. Let them look. He advanced slowly, savoring her fear. I gotta camp up in the hills. Nice and private. We'll have all the time we need to finish what we started. Hand found the heavy brass bell on her desk. Gift from Henrik Henderson when the school opened. Don't come any closer, or what? You'll ring for your precious preacher. Josiah lunged forward with surprising speed for such a large man. Ruth swung the bell with all her strength, connecting solidly with Josiah's temple. He staggered, but didn't fall, his face contorting with rage as blood trickled down his cheek. You little bitch, he snarled, grabbing for her. The schoolhouse door exploded inward as Eli burst through. taking in the scene with one comprehensive glance. His face went absolutely white, then dark with a fury Ruth had never seen from him. "Get away from my wife." This time there was no hesitation, no attempt at Christian mercy. Eli moved like a man possessed, his fist connecting with Josiah's jaw, in a blow that sent the bigger man crashing into the blackboard. Before Josiah could recover, Eli had him by the throat, pressing him against the wall. "I told you what would happen if you came near her again," Eli said, his voice deadly quiet. "Eli," Ruth said softly, touching his arm. "He's not worth it." The contact seemed to break through Eli's rage. He released Josiah, who crumpled to the floor, gasping. "Sheriff Morse," Eli called to the lawman who had appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. "I believe you have a warrant for Mr. Blackthorne's arrest." Something about cattle rustling from the Morrison ranch. Ruth stared at her husband in amazement as Sheriff Morse, looking decidedly uncomfortable, placed Josiah in irons. Later, as they sat together in their parlor, she asked the obvious question, "How did you know about cattle rustling?" Eli's smile was enigmatic. "May have mentioned to Widow Morrison that her missing cattle might be found at a certain camp in the hills. Amazing what territorial rangers can discover when they know where to look. You've been planning this." I've been protecting my wife. There's a difference." Ruth looked at this man who had saved her twice now, who had given her not just his name, but his complete devotion, who had helped her build a life beyond anything she'd ever imagined possible. "Love you, Eli Thornfield," she said simply. "And I love you, Ruth Thornfield. Always and forever," as the sun set over Millhaven painting. The sky in shades of gold and crimson, Ruth reflected on the strange path that had brought her here. She'd fled one wedding in terror and found herself in another that had become the foundation of everything good in her life. Tomorrow, there would be lessons to teach, children to inspire, and a future to build alongside the extraordinary man who had taken her in from the rain and given her not just his name, but his heart. Outside their window, the church bell chimed the evening hour, and Ruth smiled, knowing that whatever storms might come, she would never face them alone again.